Hello and welcome to another edition of the Paranormal Concept Show. I'm your host Paul Rook, and as always we are joined by the stupendous, the wonderful, evil queen Kerry Greenaway. And
Hello.
hello, and the boy wonder Richard Clemens.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
When are you going to upgrade him from Boy Wonder is what I want to know.
What to the stupendous boy wonder?
Yeah, or something a
I'll,
bit
I'll
better
do
than Boy Wonder.
I'll do that
Yeah.
next week. I'll do that next week.
Good.
Might change it completely next week. We'll see.
Oh dearie me, yeah. Catch us on the blind side, yeah.
Yeah, that's it. How have you both been anyway this week?
Yeah, good. I've been on holiday. It's fantastic.
Oh, you're 2
Go
nights
anywhere
away,
nice?
yes.
No, just at home, catching up, playing in my crystal room,
Okay, excellent. Cool. And Richard, what have you been up to?
Not a lot really until the weekend that's just gone. We went out on an investigation, didn't we?
We did.
We did.
Very,
Yeah, it
very
was
good
really
that
good.
was as well. We had an enjoyable time down in Sandwich in Kent. of all
More
Yes.
of that coming soon.
Mm.
Absolutely. Had a sandwich and everything.
We did.
Yeah.
I did find it quite funny. The location was opposite a sandwich bar, but it's all little amusement there. But there you go.
And a really crappy karaoke bar as well.
Yeah,
Yeah. There was that. Okay, so what's on the agenda for tonight's show?
Oh, have I got a guest for you, my beautiful boys? I have got a real life and kicking doctor in the house.
Oh, good. My knees have been playing up a bit.
Not that kind of doctor. He is Mr. Dr. Cal Cooper, psychologist, a senior lecturer in psychology at the Northampton University. He does leading research. God, the lineup of this guy is incredible. He does leading research on death and bereavement, positive psychology, human sexual behaviour, parapsychology, and research methods. Not only that, he is a council member of the SPR, the Society of Psychical Research, and he's also an author. He has written books such as Telephone Calls from the Dead, Conversations with Ghosts, and Paracoustics. And his latest outing is a TV skeptic, of all things, on the MJ Dixon affair, Paranormal Captured. Good evening, Cal. How are you?
Good evening. I'm very well, thank you. How are you?
Have I covered everything? Because there was a lot more on your resume, but I think I covered the salient points.
The MJ Dixon affair was an interesting way of entitling Paranormal Captured.
How did that happen? That's all I want to know.
How did I end up on it?
Yeah. Not a role I would have seen you in personally, but
Well, I've been asked numerous times before by various shows to be in that role, and the first time, I guess, for something like that was Most Haunted, and that's when they got to something like series 12 or 13, and I don't know if by that point, I think audience for that was changing. I mean, there was that massive boom when they had live shows and all sorts, and people would tune in. I think the live shows were actually quite fun in many ways when people were watching along live, but as you know, that they started off with Jason Carl in series 1, and he was someone that was essentially hired in to play the part of a parapsychologist. He isn't actually a parapsychologist himself. So after that, by series 2, things were changing. They got Phil Wyman in to be an on-site investigator, and then some other contributors, people like David Scanlon, who's head of the Hampshire Ghost Club and written books on different haunted locations in the UK. But they then started to turn to people like Dr. Matthew Smith, who at the time was at Liverpool Hope University, and he's now at Buxton University with also Dr. Kieran O'Keefe. They're both there. And Kieran was the parapsychologist that followed him. Then they had Dr. Louis Sava, Steve Parsons was involved with it for a while. And for various reasons, I didn't go ahead with what they were doing for series 12 and 13. And so I'd done various pilots and documentaries along the way, whether the shows were just asking for my input on hauntings, or I was out on investigations, or stuff that just wasn't even to do with ghosts and hauntings. It was what we do at the university. And I'd done some events for MJ before. I'd gone along and done presentations for things like Paracom, and she knew that the producers at Woodcut Media had done series 1 already, and they had a male psychologist already involved, but he wasn't a parapsychologist. So I think they thought against Angela, who's I suppose the female counterpart, who's a behavioral expert. They just got these samey, generic psychological assumptions about what was going on in the location. So I guess the producers asked MJ, who would actually be a good expert to turn to that's more knowledgeable about research on anomalous experiences. So I guess that got MJ thinking about parapsychologists, and she turned to me and said, would you speak to the producers about doing it? So my first initiation into that was last December, when they just did a one-off extended Christmas special, and I replaced their existing psychologist. And quite quickly after that, I think they got really good figures for the winter special, and they just instantly went ahead for series 2. So I was on board for the second part.
It's fantastic. So what do you make of it all? What is, how do you what's the process of that for you?
Well, the filming's quite simple in many ways. I mean, you've seen the format, that it's just being sat in a chair and commenting, and it's very much like the paranormal show version of Gogglebox. You've got people sat watching all this footage, and we are actually watching all these various clips that people have taken around the world, or MJ and Danny going to these locations, and we have to comment on them. There's starting and stopping points, and we're asked questions, and or if we want, we can just stop and comment if something stands out to us. So to get through all of that, the winter special, I was only on it, you could see me for like 2 minutes worth of footage, but that was 5 hours worth of filming for me. So that they're taking out what clips they think most suit whatever it is they're showing the audience, but then they've got to try and balance that with the views of 5 other people as well. So I suppose filming it, you can get quite frustrated that your view isn't fully represented, but at the same time, they're trying to sell a show here, they're trying to get the audience, they're trying to be fair and representative. But if it was just a whole hour's worth of me, then probably the investigation, quote investigation, wouldn't be as exciting, and it's just kind of knocking everything down, because for me, I haven't seen anything so far in the footage that's been at all surprising, but certainly interesting in terms of, I suppose, anomalistic psychology, saying, look, these are the various reasons why people think they're having an unusual experience when in fact they're not. So that's the process for me: sit in the chair, watch the footage, comment, and then I get asked questions about it, and they pick which bit of what I say seems the most interesting to use.
You do have quite a skeptical perspective, don't you, towards anomalous phenomena?
Yeah, and I suppose I would if I was a biologist or a chemist, or I was working in any other science, whatever it was that I was dealing with. Every scientist should be, and I suppose is, a skeptic of their own field. You have to be, to make sure that whatever outcome you're coming out with is that outcome and not due to other factors. And to do that, you've got to critically think through the other possibilities and the methods that you're using to make sure that nothing else kind of seeps its way in and represents itself as, seemingly the outcome, when actually it's in disguise. It's something else. It's an anomaly that we haven't accounted for, or probably have, and it's still got through. So you have to be a skeptic. You have to be a skeptic of any discipline that you're working with when it comes to science and trying to chart new territory.
Do you get frustrated with the paranormal field as it stands now? Do you feel it's moved on at all in any way, shape or form?
Well, I get frustrated with terminology that comes through. I mean, there's the paranormal field. I hear that a lot when watching feedback from shows like Paranormal Captured. And then there's, I suppose, representation as well, because, and you guys just mentioned investigation, and we can come back to that. But in the show, what Danny and MJ do, that's termed investigation. But that's not an investigation as far as science is concerned, or as far as I'm concerned when I go out and collect data of purported hauntings. I don't understand the gadgets that they're taking in terms of what their true rationale is. I understand what the gadgets allegedly are doing, but researchers don't use them. Scientists don't use these things. It's all created from TV hype, and people have gone out and bought them. The nighttime aspect, the infrared, that seems to all have been heightened since the most haunted era. Most of my time spent in haunted locations has been in daylight hours with all the lights on. Because that's the situation in which the eyewitness reported their claims. So why on earth would I go in the darkness, where no one working in that building has ever reported being sat there in the dark at 3 a.m. and had a weird experience? Of course not. And these are day-to-day accounts. It's very odd that that's represented on the telly, but that's the interest factor. Who on earth would tune in to a haunting program where it's just filming a load of people working in an office and there's a parapsychologist lingering around saying, well, I'm just going to hang out here because you guys say this is when you actually reported this phenomena, so I'm going to hang out too and just document you day by day. It's not that interesting. It'd be just a very much a sort of a Big Brother program with even less going on. And so that's frustrating to see. Yeah, the paranormal world, you know, you then see a lot of social media about people arguing about rights and wrongs and stuff. And it seems, and there shouldn't be really, because if you're interested in doing research on this, you're interested in doing research, but it does create a sort of a them and us affair where you have this group of people saying the paranormal field, the paranormal community, this doesn't look good for them. I'm like, who are you speaking to? This doesn't touch what parapsychology is doing, what we're doing on hauntings at the universities. And, you know, if we do an investigation, we go out, we question the eyewitnesses, we set up ways in which we might go about looking into data that we could collect and observing the building. We write this report up, it goes off to a journal for peer review. We get the peer review comments back, we amend the paper if it's been accepted, it goes through and it gets published and hopefully further scrutinised. That's a full investigation with the closing of a report that will probably then linger on in discussion. All these other instances where we hear investigation, there's no outcome. It's just someone wandering around a building. I'd be really upset if I hired in, well, you can't hire it, but if you got some police officers in because your house has been robbed and they said, well, come and do an investigation. They just wander around your house for a bit and say, right, see you later. That was interesting. Well, can we follow up, please? You know, where's your report? What did you find out? You know, where's this actually going? What are you doing with the data? Are you making some inquiries? These ideas about these being investigations, they're not. I mean, very loosely, they're ghost hunts, but it's ghost hunts for the pure interest, I guess, because there's no outcome. There's no rationale or structure to the way in which the data is gathered. People are just going to a building for a night and then going home. That's not an investigation. So that kind of stuff sort of niggles at me a little bit as well. I suppose I find that quite frustrating.
Oh, we're in trouble, boys, because we called ours an investigation. Around the building, having fun.
Did you see where I'm coming from with that, though, and the terminology that's used?
I understand it. Yeah, the terminology that used is twisted, shall we say?
And I think that is because of media influence again, because and not to keep kind of pointing it at Most Haunted, but that did actually spur on a lot of kind of public interest groups. But the term investigation was regularly used, saying we'll do a 24-hour investigation, blah, blah. And they showed the essence of it, because whoever was the investigator, from Phil Wyman to Kieran being there, they were wandering about with a clipboard, they were making notes, they were seemingly following up, but they were the only one that was doing it. Mm-hmm. And even then, it didn't turn into an official report, and no one was really interested in what the parapsychologist was doing anyway, because they were the party pooper, you know. So, but it's not the true representation of what's actually done when you actually want to go out and collect data and understand the initial reports. They end up in the journals, and then people follow up the report and the claim. On TV, it just wouldn't make good TV. But then that's the problem, because then you just have a lot of misleading the public with what does get transmitted.
I agree. That is the main problem. Most Haunted equals an absolute explosion in paranormal interest, and people going out and thinking, "Oh, this is great. We can go out and do that. We can copy the blueprint that the TV show Most Haunted." I know we're picking on Most Haunted, but that was when the explosion happened of the field. So clubs like the Ghost Club, the SPRA, they've been around for a lot longer than that, haven't they?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so the Ghost Club, its origins date back roughly to about the 1860s. I think there's a bit of debate over when it officially started up. Then you've got the College of Psychic Studies in 1881, the Society for Psychical Research in 1882, and then the American Society for Psychical Research between 1884 and 1885. And so, yeah, they are the longest going institutions for officially collecting data on these claims, publish them, and opening them up to debate and also scrutiny as well in the ways in which we go about collecting this data, if it's good enough, if it's thorough enough, and also getting the perspectives of philosophers, psychologists, physicists, and various other fields as well.
It's a very different ball game when you hit the societies, isn't it? When you enter into that world, it's a completely different vibe to what you might have been used to as a TV copycat ghost hunter.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you keep talking about data? What data are you collecting when you do an investigation then? I mean, you're not
Well,
using your EMF meters and your Mel meters and your eddies, are you?
No. And there are kind of instances in which they might be necessary. Steve Parsons has just completed the new guidebooks for using equipment in haunted locations for the SPR. But some of it is just really basic stuff where if someone's making a claim, then you want to interview those people, record that, transcribe it, check with other eyewitnesses, check with other people that have been there over previous times, whether it's a public venue or a private property. You could check with previous tenants and members of staff or whatever. Follow that trail of inquiry. You could check then the history books as well to see what's been documented in those, or some of the local booklets that might be written on ghosts and hauntings. And then if you're going into the location, if you're wanting to spend several weeks there, then it's just spending time in day and nighttime hours with floor plans laid out as to those particular rooms that seem to have had reports in them, and spending times in rooms as well that haven't had those reports in them as well. There's various ways in which you could actually set up experiments where you bring in some fellow investigators, but they might not be as clued up on those previous accounts as you are, and so you're actually getting them to spend time in certain rooms with them not knowing which are the hotspots and which are the decoys, and getting them to sit down with a notepad and pen, and every 10 minutes just writing down about their observations and how they think and feel, and starting to collate those within just a Word document on a laptop. And then afterwards, you can just compare how people felt over time to see if there are certain things about the environment, those particular rooms, that then tell you whether there's an environmental factor at play, various psychological elements at play, and what might actually be going on that relates to previous eyewitness testimony as well. So it can be a very simple investigation. Besides that, stuff that no more than Harry Price was looking into. You've wandered around the building, you've checked for windows and doors that may have drafts and cracks that might actually be producing a small breeze that people within that room think, I'm feeling a cold rush of air here, or feels like someone's brushing past me. And you've checked for air currents and all those kinds of things. Just getting familiar with the building and how it ticks, and looking for all those potential conventional explanations from room to room that might account for why people are having experiences. Again, going back to Paranormal Captured, I think it's when they went to the Jamaica Inn. There was one of those, I think they were spending time in the bar, and there was an instant response of, oh my God, did you hear that? That was footsteps, or that sounds like footsteps upstairs. Okay, brilliant, but you've instantly jumped to the interpretation. That sounds like footsteps upstairs. It's a very old wood, building with wooden joists, very old wood that's been there for a long time. I live in a building that was built in 1800. That's an old blacksmith's cottage. So turn on the heating, and even just the natural rise and fall in temperature throughout the night and day, the wood does suddenly go crack and bang and change and tick along the floorboards. It might sound similar to something, but don't put the interpretation to it. If you know someone is definitely not upstairs, then instantly telling yourself that's footsteps upstairs, that's not going to help you in your later interpretation. You also get odd ones where they say, do you hear that? It sounds like the noise of a body being dragged. Really? How often have you been with someone where how do you know categorically the sound of bodies being dragged? That's a bit odd that you're familiar with that sound. I'm a bit worried. I mean, instant interpretation being added. So there's all these things, just looking for the natural conventional explanations, natural documentation, notepad, write about how you feel, like you're doing self-tweets to yourself every 10 minutes, and collect that data. The gadgets and stuff are a complete distraction built on by TV hype, unless there's any cause to use them. Those initial reports that I've just mentioned might lead to using EMF meters to look for certain rooms that have heightened electromagnetic fluctuations that are causing people to have a sense of presence, for their hairs to stand up on the back of their arms and feel sick in those rooms and things like that. That's what those devices are for, to look for these natural environmental factors that can have those psychological consequences.
Paul, did you want to speak at that point?
No, I can totally follow everything you're saying, actually, and it does make complete sense.
Good. I'm glad. Nice
Yeah.
to see you guys. Take care.
That's it, guys. That's all we've got. So, as a psychologist, the plays that go on that you see out and about in the field, and I'm going to call it the field, but the general ghost hunting community, it must be a psychologist's dream to watch all of those things play out, the belief systems and the confirmation bias and all those other things we've spoken about before. It must be a dream for you. You probably could write a paper just about psychological problems.
Oh, yeah. And people do. I mean, I've got a couple of colleagues that, I mean, not psychological problems, just more so the natural human behavior that's playing out. So I've got colleagues that are even now doing their PhDs on, groups, media influence, and how the media has influenced how the groups do things. And I get invited to charity events where they're obviously doing these mock-ups of wandering about in the dark, and people bring over their own gadgets and stuff, and a medium might go along and they take breaks throughout the night, and it's all very friendly and for a good cause and stuff if that's what someone wants to do. But then people are asking my true opinion of what they're doing, and they're very open to it, but they still want to do what they're doing, and they still want to go to a stately manor and then do a Ouija board and ask if their own granddad's there. So people are doing it because it's need serving, or that's what makes them happy. It's part of their hobby. But then I think I get frustrated in seeing it when people believe they're doing it seriously and they're taking it seriously, when in fact I've already informed them that's not the way we should go about doing things. And this is the reason why. And they say, oh, totally understand. And then they still do it. You're like, well, then let's create a divide here. Are you doing it for yourself, or are we actually trying to learn something? And if you're just doing it for yourself, then you've got to be careful in telling other people that it's serious, because then they'll just do the same. And that is what happened from the TV hype. I think it was by the time of 2007, 2008, Kieran O'Keefe, Anne Winspert, and Steve Parsons presented a paper to the SPR and Joint Parapsychological Association conference that was taking place at the University of Winchester. And it was called "Have the Lunatics Taken Over the Haunted Asylum?" And it was about independent ghost hunting groups and what a Google search showed at the time. And in a way, I think it was trying to protect the SPR and the actual spontaneous case investigators that went out, and parapsychologists and so forth. And at that time, a Google search was showing over 2,800 independent paranormal groups within the UK alone, which was quite scary because of the hype of these shows and all these locations. It meant that if we consider that data, where the parapsychologists or the SPR, the Ghost Club and so on, could actually go out and collect data and spend as much time as they like in these locations to actually understand the science of what's going on, they were suddenly lost to all these local groups that will push themselves forward as professionals, might not have any particular scientific skills to do what they're doing, or therapeutic skills to deal with people that are actually suffering trauma and live with these buildings, and they're actually that their own traumatic issues are relating to the haunting type phenomena that they're reporting. And so you've got these people that aren't professionally trained to deal with what they're doing, and the locations don't know the difference between the professional and these amateur groups going out. And so I remember a few instances where I actually contacted a few places I actually wanted to do some research on. And I said, yeah, I'm calling from the University of Northampton, or I was emailing, and I was really interested in sorting out some time with you to come and collect some data on the reports that have happened over time in the building. And they got back and said, oh yeah, that'd be great. You can bring 2 dozen guests along, and it'll be £1,000 for the night. Yeah. And I replied, I'm sorry, I think there's miscommunication here. I'm from the University of Northampton. I'm gonna come, and I'd like to come, if possible, and collect some data. It would just be me. And they said, yeah, but if you want to bring some guests along, that would be 2 dozen of them max, and it'd be £1,000. What do you mean by guests? I'm calling from the University of Northampton. It'd be me as a researcher alone. What exactly do you mean by guests? And they said, for the event. I said, what event? What? I'm going to come in and collect data for research. Give me your interpretation of what you think I'm doing. And there was this complete line where they had no idea there were actual scientists that would go out and study hauntings for the sake of research papers, for the sake of psychology. They thought it was all just, oh, people turn up, they've got embroidered T-shirts, they've got their cases full of gadgets, members of the public turn up, they bring the sandwiches, there's hot flasks of coffee and tea we put out, they leave about 2 a.m. and we lock up. That they didn't think that there's someone that just comes and lives with the members of staff that show people around each day, and they're wandering around with a clipboard or whatever, and they're coming and going and just collecting data, might bring a couple of PhD students along to do the same. That they couldn't fathom that there was such a thing at all, because there was no entertainment factor there. It didn't look fun. It looked like, someone that's come to check the gas meter or something, and they're very quiet and just getting on with what they're doing. So yeah, it's a whole other world that's just disappeared really since, again, the early noughties, because the amount of people going out to locations just started to swallow up access to them. And those locations then had no idea, and they still don't, I think, many of them, who they're actually dealing with and what's one person from the next.
Mm-hmm.
If there's one thing you filmed, if someone comes and say, right, Cal, there is one thing we're going to give you that you're going to give to the ghost hunting community, what would it be, or what would the advice be?
Library access. Just read.
Yeah.
It'd just be that. The amount of people that I talk to, and I say, where did you get your inspiration from? Where, why are you doing this? And a lot of them just say, oh, I've just always been interested from an early age, and then all these programs. And I'm like, oh, stop. That's where it's gone too far. I'm like, I regret that, but my early age, I had the same opportunities as everyone else here, so I don't understand why it went down this path. And I'm not saying there's a right or wrong. I do when it comes to methodology. There's no right or wrong when it comes to your own background and what interested you. Interest can come from any place. But I went to the local public library with school once a week, and me and my friends just went to the section of maybe only 6 books or so and a couple of local pamphlets that talked about hauntings and Fortean phenomena. And that then led me to looking for other books and stuff, following up stuff that it mentioned on Harry Price. Who was he? Let me find out some other books on him. And so I think there's a lot of ghost hunters that are very much uninformed on their own history. And if they were only to read that, then it would stop them backtracking and actually recovering history today, where they're actually covering a lot of ground that's already been done, and they shouldn't necessarily be doing what they're doing now. It's been seen as old hat and don't rehash it. Let's move forward with these methodologies and what we know. And if you're going to do it, let's do it seriously so we can make some progress. But at the moment, I just see a lot of running in circles to no end, really, because no reports produced. So I think, just books, if people are members of the SPR, and there's a few other organisations as well, they have their own lending libraries where if you're a member, you just request it and it gets posted to you, particular books.
Mm-hmm.
Some memberships can be, between £15-30 a year, something like that. So each month, that's nothing to have unlimited access to books and stuff like that through the post. Even if you just go to your own local library and there's particular books, again, a lot of them can interlibrary loan. So reading is the main thing, really, that will make for a far more informed ghost hunter. And it should improve, why you're here now, who's been there before you, what's been done before you, so what should you be doing now?
No, I totally agree with that.
Yeah,
Discernment
100%.
with what you read as well, I would put in there. Because there's a lot of self-published books now being put out there, Cal.
There are, yes.
from the ghost hunting community.
But then you've got to say to yourself, well, where do they go? Most books that are the leading ones on ghost hunting and various other things, they will get reviewed by journals. And, if they're a self-published one that doesn't really know what it's talking about, it probably will get looked at by one of the editors, book review editors, and then tossed to one side. It hasn't actually been reviewed, and it hasn't been reviewed because they probably haven't got anything nice to say. So if it's self-published, it might only just get circulated amongst that person's own social group. And the same thing happens when those people decide to get online qualifications and call themselves everything from a parapsychologist to a doctor. But they wouldn't dare turn around to a parapsychologist and say, I'm a parapsychologist too. I've had that maybe 2 or 3 times, and people just stop doing that now because they know of the consequences of lying about your qualifications or calling yourself a doctor when you're not one. But people are still out there doing that. There's quite a few people on their social media profiles that will happily put diploma in parapsychology and various other things. of which there is no such thing. There is if you want to pay $200 for one, and someone will just use their printer and whack it in the post for you. Thank you very much. After you've filled in a few multiple choice questions out of a single book. But there are ways and means. But again, this is all come from TV hype and people playing on it and seeing that there's money to be made here, and people will separate with £200 or more for that certificate. People will part with a few £100s for this gadget that flashes very nicely in the dark and makes for an interesting focal point of the evening. But it's just trying to separate that TV fantasy from the actual research that's done, truth from fiction. It's really hard because I think some people are really they're deceived, and they don't deserve to be deceived. They don't realize they're being deceived, and they're so caught up in a whole community that believes the same. For someone to come along, you then get the instant backlash where they each defend each other and say, "Oh, that person's just jealous," and it's the instant kind of reaction. Like, believe me, guys, you've got nothing to be jealous of. This is my full working career. I'm trying to help you. If you're suggesting you're a whole army of ghost hunters and whatever that want to do this, that saves me a hell of a lot of time. So do it right, because then I just have to read what you've done. Instead, there could be whole armies of ghost hunters out there that are doing it wrong, and they might end up on TV, they might end up in the newspapers, and it has a backlash to what independent ghost hunters through the SPR might be doing, or parapsychologists, and it gets seen as the same thing, and so it looks really bad. When people then say parapsychology and they think of someone running about in the dark with a night vision camera, the two are very far apart from each other, and that's certainly not how parapsychologists would go about doing it. Not that there's many. I mean, Steve Parsons will probably say that quite a lot as well. You can probably count on one hand how many parapsychologists do still actively go out to haunted locations that are interested in field investigations. But there's still a lot of people within the Ghost Club and within the SPR that are interested, all with varying levels of expertise and knowledge on the background in this. But yeah, I think it's sad how many people are deceived, that they would like to know what's going on and how to do things, but they don't know where that information is going to come from. They don't know it exists. We constantly have to try and think of ways in which to invent platforms. I think Steve wants to go back to doing ghost hunting workshops and essentially travel up and down the UK, but it's getting people aware that those things are going on, and for some people, getting them out of that that self-defense thing. They're just jealous. Well, actually, let's just pretend for a minute you don't know anything. Come along to the workshop and see what it's like, and see if you'll actually pick up something that might benefit what you're already doing. So yeah, there's loads of problems going on with that, and how you actually go about improving the standards of ghost hunting. But it's open debate. Open debate is the main thing, and reading.
But I think that process has started at one point when I first started delving into the SPR and the ASAP worlds. I kind of felt that there was a massive divide. I do feel that that's narrowing now. There's a bigger social media presence. You're hearing more people like yourself coming onto podcasts and talking about things, and bringing that awareness of those groups and becoming more open door policy rather than the closed door policy that it seemed to have previously, because we're not a lot of people in the paranormal are not academic people, so there's that reticent to, you feel thick, quite frankly. I talk to you, Cal, and your retention of information is phenomenal. I haven't got that. I have to have it written down in front of me. But my interest is honest. My interest is passionate, and my interest is, I will go and read a book if you suggest it, or I will, look at what you're up to and think, oh God, that looks like an interesting talk, and maybe come along. Obviously pre-COVID this was, but that's starting to open up again now, things like that. So it's now becoming more of an open door policy where the everyday normal person won't feel intimidated or thick, for a better word, when you enter that world. So it is starting, that process of integration is starting to happen by accessibility to people that are actually involved in that, like yourself.
Yeah, I mean, I'd heard about those ideas before, saying, the SPR and that don't show their data, they don't share it with us, and they're closed off. And I think there was a bit of that kind of, you said paranormal again, this paranormal world, and this hostility towards the researchers. And I think those barriers have always been down. It's just one not knowing how to approach the other and say, you know, we're all welcome here. Just come in, and as you've experienced, Kerry, because you've been along to the talks and you sat down, and everyone makes you feel welcome when you go to an SPR talk, tea and biscuits and whatever, get to meet people like Bernard Carr, Rupert Sheldrake, if they're there talking and stuff. Everyone's really friendly and open to more people being involved, engaged, and having open discussion. I mean, how does this, let me throw the questions back to you. So you've mentioned, you know, the paranormal community and stuff like that. How do you guys see, or how has it always sat with you, thinking about universities and parapsychologists, thinking about the SPR versus people going out and ghost hunting? Explain to me how you've seen divides, if indeed you even believe there is a divide. Maybe you don't think there ever has been, but just people aren't talking. So what are your thoughts?
I'd say for me personally, I think it's more of the intellectual level. And that's the bit that I can't get past, because I don't know, to be honest. It's difficult to explain, but I've always I have been a member of the SPR and the ASAP one as well. So I've had a little bit of input, but I've not ever gone to an SPR seminar or talk or anything like that as of yet. Still yet to do that. But I think, you know, if a case came to me and I felt out of my depth, I mean, I could take witness statements and things like that and transcribe them, but then I'd forward them to someone in the SPR and say, what do you think of this? You know, how do I go about this? So I'd still use it as such as a tool, because I know that you're there and you exist, and that's the sort of thing that you're used to. I might be out of my depth, but, you know, at least you could help and advise me. So I've always used the SPR.
Richard?
Yeah, I think it's sort of from the ghost hunting community. They just have to learn the etiquette of sort of like communication with people in the SPR and ASAP. I should imagine that's the sort of feeling I get. You know, we are sort of like moving in the same direction, but there's a sort of like a little bit of a sort of shyness about sort of getting the etiquette to actually communicate. Perhaps the SPR and ASAP they use different terminology, and it just sort of take time out and learn this terminology.
I mean, there's a lot of assumption because you say terminology there, and I suppose this again might come back to what you said about that academic approach. And a lot of people forget that the SPR is made up of various people. There's about 1,000 members of the SPR, and most of them are just members of the general public. When it comes to the actual core of the SPR, that's a council committee, including myself, of about 18 to 20 people. And all of us, bar maybe a couple because they've got backgrounds in law or other things like that, we have academic backgrounds. Not all of us are working in academia, but had studied at higher degrees or whatever, because what we did focused on academic study of parapsychological phenomena through the university system. But as I say, not everyone's working in that still. It was just part of their background, and then they've got, you know, various jobs in the private sector and outside of university. So I think again that kind of assumption that there's this academic wall to be breached to approach the SPR, it really isn't there, and it's not as intimidating as you might think, because the members are, you know, anyone and everyone really. It's not got any kind of criteria for you must have this many degrees or it must be in this and that. It's anyone. And so I think that intimidation that anyone actually feels about approaching the SPR or ASAP or the Ghost Club, people need to, you know, not necessarily, I'm not telling you go ahead now and join, go along to one of their events, because you don't have to be a member to do so, and just go and meet people. And probably dispel some of these myths that might linger around on social media about what these groups are like, and even that one about, you know, do they keep data to themselves and stuff like that? Well, no, not really. I mean, people are trying to do internet searches. The internet is awash with absolute nonsense on this kind of research. And the SPR journal and that has not been open access. It's just hopefully right now turning into an open access journal now. But not every academic journal has been, because unless you pay membership dues to keep the journal going, they've not existed. A freebie journal, someone's got to edit it, people have got to contribute, and so someone needs paying. So that's why for a long time it was closed down. But open access again might make people feel a bit more open to approaching places like the SPR, because once we reach an open access kind of policy, then with a click of a button you should be able to get all the latest papers. But just wandering into the SPR, you can just turn up and just go straight into the library and just peruse whatever books and journals you wish.
I think part of the problem is I walked into that library, I wouldn't even know where to start, in all honesty. Where do you start with that? You walk, I mean, the library, oh my God.
Start A, Kerry. That's what
Honestly, well, it has an impact, libraries, for me. I love a library.
Yeah.
But where would I start with that? I mean, I've got obviously quite a few books here at home, and there's so much information out in there. Where do you start?
Well, the most impressive walls in there are the ones that are the journals. So you've got the Journal of the SPR, you've got the Proceedings, and then you've got the American version as well. You've got the International Journal of Parapsychology, the Journal of Parapsychology, and many others. Those periodicals, like the ones I'm sat around loads in my home library now, probably some 2,000 or 3,000 here, they're reference. And, people look and say, God, have you read all of them? No, I haven't. I've gone to one particular article or a paragraph because it contains something that I need. And it's mainly because I've read something else that's told me that it's there. And I've collected these over time. I probably, in some ways, because I'm completely involved in it, it's my paid job to be doing what I'm doing and talking to you now. I've made it my purpose to get my own library, so I've always got it to hand. But if I was less involved and I was just a member of the SPR, I've got everything I need at the SPR. But the journals, no, don't get intimidated by those. They eventually lead you to a fuller report if you want the first-hand source. So what I'd recommend is, let's say, for example, you are, and we've talked about ghost and hauntings, so you're interested in that. I would say, well, with stuff like that, go to Andrew Mackenzie's books on apparitions and hauntings and ghosts and apparitions. They're two really good books from the 1980s. And as you read through some of those classic cases that are investigated, that he summarized in detail, he's giving citation points all the way through. It doesn't disrupt the writing. You just turn to the index at the back about that particular chapter, and it breaks down all the sources of information he's read to build that chapter. And if you're interested in, say, learning more about the Cheltenham ghost, which happened in the 1800s and gave the eyewitnesses quite a lot of opportunity over the few years they experienced it to investigate and experiment with the apparition, it will tell you the original SPR reports in which it was mentioned. And so therefore, you might then go into the SPR library and look up that proceedings paper. From the proceedings, you pull it off the shelf, the particular volume, you might photocopy the whole report just to read that very first report that came out. Another example could be John Beloff, Parapsychology, A Concise History. So that came out in 1993, 94. It's a really good textbook. You'd probably find it for $5 on eBay, but it just gives you the basic overview you need to know about the history of parapsychology. Again, John Beloff was an academic at the University of Edinburgh. He's written this for a public audience, but every chapter will have some sort of citation point to build it. So again, you go to the back of the book. If you want to know about a particular element of history he's mentioning, you then follow that up, and it could just lead you to another book. It could be a conference paper abstract that the SPR probably has if you ask them for it, or again, journal papers. And you go back to that first-hand source. Everything leads you on a paper trail. If you go to a main textbook, it's been built up of various sources. And so you just trace those references if you want to know. And that's that academic route. Otherwise, you just read the book and you take it in. The academic side leads you down these routes.
And that is what we call following the rabbit hole. That's delving down the rabbit hole, following various threads, various links through. When you've got, when we're looking at a show, that's what we do. We do a start, and then we follow threads through to build the information we bring to you guys. on a weekly basis. That's the basics of research. We might not cover everything that there is out there, but we've followed threads through, and we found that from various sources, and hopefully cite most of our sources whilst we're doing the show as well.
You
So
nearly
that
said you nearly said we followed through. I think you nearly said
we
that
follow
might happen on some investigation.
yeah,
Well, yeah.
depending on what happens. Going back to that, in regards to members of the public who are having anomalous occurrences occur, going to the local ghost hunting community, I will say this: I've been in this world for quite a while now, and people talk about it a lot, but don't actually come up with a lot, I would say. So I don't actually think private cases or happening as much as people are saying they're happening. So I don't think the SPR are losing out on a lot, quite frankly, because if it was
Well,
something that bad, I think they'll be coming to the experts.
It swings and roundabouts, really. I mean, the spontaneous case committee do get quite a regular amount of worldwide reports coming to them, and they're of various nature as well. They are not just haunting type experiences, and the committee is made up of various people of various interests. We stick by this policy at the university, where if we get something that's direct to the university, and I even tell my students this when we talk about apparitions and hauntings, we tell the person to keep a diary for a couple of weeks and note down every time and particular instance you think you've encountered of various phenomena. And then after a week, I'll call you and talk me through the first week of the diary. And then I want you to do it for another week. And then I'll call again, and then we'll sort meeting up. And I'll probably come out with another colleague. So we're at the very least going in pairs to investigate it. For a very long time, it hasn't followed through with checking out the property, because at the point you've told someone start making a diary, they start to lose interest. And that's when we say question the ulterior motives. If they've finally come to us, would they actually sooner have gone to a newspaper? What were they actually trying to get out of this? Did they just instantly want some ghost hunters to turn up to their house? Were there various psychological issues at play there? What's going on? And so for our own help, well, it's ethics on both sides. You know, for their safety and our safety, we need to make sure that, you know, we're protecting their welfare by taking them seriously and asking them to keep a diary. We're following it up. We're doing checkups on them with that phone call, say, how are you? How's the last week been? Talk me through the diary, offering whatever advice you can. But they don't seem to come to fruition in many cases. But they still happen. They still get reported.
Funnily enough, that's exactly how I do conduct my investigations if I get a private case come in.
Yeah.
But that's one thing I will say I do think has filtered through to the community. It is that get a diary, at least the basic level of the beginning of a research project, I would say you would call it. That I would say is the one thing that has filtered through to the ghost hunting groups, which is a positive, right?
Yeah. No, that is a positive. And I'm glad that happens. I mean, I'd certainly, I mean, not that it's happened with us for a long time, as I just mentioned, but private properties are just, I think they're very, very tricky to handle. And my own personal advice for the general ghost hunting community is don't deal with those. If you think that person really is in need of help and they're struggling, then just redirect them to the SPR that might assign them to various spontaneous case committee members that have backgrounds in psychiatry, psychology, and various other fields, as well as being knowledgeable of the data and the background literature for that. Just because of, again, you don't know who you're going to encounter, what various problems they might personally have, and various other issues at play. It's just not worth getting involved in that. And what we hear in the news about various people being abducted and attacked and various other things, being sorted out by an institution or an organization that has its own code of ethics, it's got its own safeguarding procedures in place. You know, people are informed that you're going out that day to visit those people, and you will call them the moment you've got to the property. You will call them the moment you've left the property, and you've said you should be no more than 2 hours there. All of that for everybody's safety, even the person making the claim. So I really just urge people that are doing their own investigations to stick with places that, you know, aren't private property. It isn't someone's personal home. It's not their personal space. per se. Pubs, they're the exception, that you've got this public house property where it might be part living, part public space for the people that go there, but you still might be going in with a team, so you're adding that safety in numbers. And then stately manors and all these other places where you have guests going around during the day and stuff like that. There are a lot safer spaces to go and investigate that have a very secure history that can be looked up quite easily and makes for an easier investigation and following that paper trail. Private properties just can be very, very dodgy territory. And I don't like the word dodgy. I wish I'd used a better one, but I mean in terms of the number of factors at play. And safety.
Well said. I want to bring you back to a term I used, which I know is another one that gets your goat a little bit. Don't worry, we will move on from this and get more into what research you do. It's the term expert.
Mm-hmm.
Now that is bandied about a lot. Well, there are no experts in the paranormal field. That's said quite a lot. I disagree with that comment. I will say that, because there are experts like yourself in certain areas of this world, isn't there?
Yeah, I mean, I find that the scapegoat comment again, such as "you're jealous," it's up there. I mean, I wouldn't go to my GP and say I've got this rash on my arm. What do you reckon? And they say, well, I reckon it's this, that, or the other, and you should use this steroid cream. And then I just huff and puff at them and go, well, there are no experts, and then just walk out. I mean, I bothered to go there in the first place seeking their advice because, they're my first port of call to direct me to more expertise in dermatology or whatever. Why on earth would you turn around to someone that's clearly displaying authority for whatever reason? But that kind of comeback usually only gets battered about between the same kinds of people. I've never seen it battered back to me when I've gone out and approached someone and asked them why they've done this, that, and the other in their own capacity, and then they turn around to me and said, "Well, there's no expert." And I'm sorry, but I am. I'm paid to be one, and a lot of people pay a lot of money to listen to me, several times a week in various classes about the research that I'm aware of or the research that I'm doing, or I'm turned to as a consultant for media or for health and well-being and parapsychology and various other things. I'm a chartered psychologist with the British Psychological Society, but my specialist field is in anomalous experiences. So sometimes they use also the scapegoat of, well, what I mean is no one is an expert in things we don't know. I'm like, well, true. No one in any field of anything is an expert in something they don't know. That's why they don't know it. But there is no standalone field called don't know it-ologists or anything like that. You can't go to
part of that world, the I don't know-ologist.
You can't go to university and do a degree in the study of not knowing anything. It's not the point. The point is that science is trying to make progress, and it makes progress by studying areas that are uncharted, where we might understand that something's going on. We've got some sort of cause and effect type thing going on, but we don't understand the process. I always relate some things to try and give drastic examples to hit home. But I'll say, well, let's turn to oncology. Various people have various forms of cancer. They operate in different ways. They affect the individuals in different ways. And we look for various ways to treat the cancer. But we don't have universal cures. There's no singular tablet that anyone with any kind of cancer could take and it cures the cancer and various things. So there's a lot of research in all kinds of areas of oncology there to be done to look at breast cancer through to skin cancer and so on and so forth, to look at the best ways to treat those kinds of people, and also knowing that person A dealing with the same kind of cancer as person B will react to treatment in different ways. So it's just a minefield of dealing with these biological systems and understanding how best treatment might work. And without money being pumped in, without the specialists, the experts being there to do the trials, to do the testing, to actually understand what's going on and the best treatment or drug to be administered, we won't make progress. The same thing happens in psychology, be it looking at child development through to our own biological psychology, and then through to this with parapsychology. People are making claims of telepathy. Well, great, about 70% of the population can relate to telepathic experiences, and there's loads of conventional explanations for them. But if we look at them on a case-by-case basis, we might have one after going through a few where no conventional explanation seems to apply. So that's where new learning needs to take place. Someone could then say, so that's where you're not an expert. Well, I am an expert in knowing the studies that have been done and the outcomes and the kinds of measures that have been put in place to make sure that nothing else is taking place that could look like telepathy. I've also read the literature on particular people that seem to have very interesting abilities day by day on this as well, and the ways in which it might show itself. So as a psychologist and parapsychologist, I'm aware of the study outcomes, the kind of behavior, the things to look out for, that I'm skilled and used to the critical thinking through these kinds of problems and how we might deal with them and interact with people that make the claim. So there's a number of things that are just floating around constantly that I have to pick out and use in my skill set to deal with these situations. So as any expert would in their own field, the GP, you've turned up, they don't know who's going to come through the door next and what they're going to be talking about. So they're constantly jumbling through their skill set, and the person says, today it's my knee, I've got a problem with my knee. They're not going to say, oh, I wasn't prepared for that, I'm not an expert in that, leave the room. They'll sit down, they will listen to the claim, they will hear about the circumstance of what's wrong with your knee, and they will critically think through the best thing to do or the next step for that person. Experts don't instantly have the answer, but it's like exams. I always find that horrible when people did exams at school and you have to just remember all that information. In the real world, you're allowed to turn to a textbook. You're allowed to re-jog your own expert memory on things to clarify things. People will still turn to you. And so that happens in all disciplines. So yes, that there are experts. It's a social media thing again. I think that's battered about just to try and shut people down in their arguments.
There you go, everybody. That told you.
No, to be fair, I've always said that. There are experts in the paranormal field. They're not experts at the unknown, because you can't be. But I'm an expert in what I do. What my day job is. I'm an expert in that, and I'm in the paranormal field, so I'm an expert in the paranormal.
Oh dear. On that note, we're going to take a quick break.
I'm an award-winning author. I have won awards, but for swimming.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've got some of them as well. And ones.
I'm an award winner from Higgy Pop. Woo. Right. Anyway, on that note, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to actually delve a little bit more into some of the personal work that Cal has actually been doing in regards to anomalous even phenomena. We'll be right back after this.
Hello, Harry Price here. If there's nothing me and my friends enjoy more here on the other side, it is to sit back and relax and listen to the Paranormal Concept Show, right here on the PA UK radio network. Broadcasting a plethora of interesting and informative content for all your paranormal needs. Find them across social media to keep up to date with forthcoming shows and all their other adventures. Hello, is there anybody there?
And welcome back to the Paranormal Concept Show, exclusive to the Paranormal UK radio network. And as you heard before the break, we have got a fantastic guest in the studio. Mr. Dr. Cal Cooper is in the studio. Mr. Dr. Cal Cooper.
It's Doctor, I'll have you know.
Doctor. Oh, you're Dr. Doc. I can say that now, can I?
Oh, right.
Last time we spoke, you was like, oh, no, you can't say Doctor. I wasn't sure if you'd done that.
Steve Parsons just won't drop it, so he keeps using it.
Oh, good. I can use that now because I do like the Doctor. It reminds me of a
song, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Dr. Beat.
That's the one.
Got several PhDs.
Right, my sweetie. The last time I spoke to you, you were in flotation tanks doing research in regards to sensory deprivation, effectively, wasn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
How's that gone? Have you published those results yet?
We published the pilot that came out in the January, I think it was January of last year, SPR journal. And that pilot began in 2016. And so we're just about to follow through that research with, we're taking on a new graduate teaching assistant. So there'll be some teaching duties involved and a PhD offered with it. So the fees are covered. And that's being led by Dr. Glenn Hitchman, who's the head of psychology, and myself. So we're essentially hiring in someone to help us collect data, and it forms part of their PhD specifically on the flotation tanks. And that'll be for the next 3 years at the University of Northampton. This all began in 2016 because I just got more and more interested with going to conferences and people just now and then mentioning flotation tanks. as a bit of a laugh, really, and saying, "Oh, it'd be funny if you got one for the university, ha ha ha." And I never really understood what the joke was about that. Why exactly is it funny? And I don't think I ever really discovered what the kind of the gag was there. But I suppose it's more so the inconvenience of it, because actual commercial flotation tanks cost around £20,000 to £25,000. They're about the size of a small town car, and you do need a room that's specifically for housing that. Nothing else can really go in there. You can't dismantle it and put it away. And, you know, very few universities would be willing to just give you a room for that also has running water in that room, that also has shower facilities, also has ventilation. It's just a big ask. And so it's not convenient. That's not to say that universities don't have them. There are universities that do have flotation tanks, but they haven't bought them specifically for parapsychology. They could be used for just looking at altered states of consciousness, looking at fitness and recovery, even recovery from operations and various other things. So I found the way around that was just so simple. Let's do a pilot study just to look at a mock-up of say, a remote viewing telepathy-based study. We didn't really distinguish between the two. Essentially, in this one, it could have been one or the other. But I said, let's just go to a commercial centre, and we will agree in the first instance how many flotation sessions we will rent out. And then we will go there and set up this experiment, and it will take place between Nottingham, which is where the flotation tank centre was, and Northampton. And we ran 12 trials, I think, between 2016 and 2018 or to early 2019, and then started to write up what we found, really, in terms of if I was inside the tank and I'd just gone in and I called Dr. David Saunders to say, right, start the experiment. He then starts a computer program that's got various video clips in there, in pools of 4 video clips each. And the computer would say, it would randomly select, say, pool 19. And within pool 19, 4 random clips, but it only shows one of them to David. And he watches it over and over again for the whole hour. It might even just be, you know, making notes and doodling and watching various elements of the clip. That's no more than 20 seconds. So it's very boring, but quite good if he drifts away sort of watching it as well. And at the end of it, it just tells him which one it was, in terms of it was clip B. And he notes that down for that trial, and the fact that it was pool 19. I come out of the tank and I remember any distinct hallucinations, feelings, sensations, or images, and I note them down or I draw them. And I seal that in an envelope, say it was trial 1. David noted trial 1 on his sealed envelope as well, and we pair them together, and that just then goes in a file. And once we've done all the trials, all of those files then go off to an independent judge, who then pulls out both envelopes for trial 1, and he is told from David's set to go to pool 19. He watches all 4 clips in pool 19, and he looks at all my drawings and what I've written, and he has to rank order from 1 to 4, which is the best one, being number 1, through to which is the worst one, being 4. And so that's how the statistics are calculated. He's looked at all of these qualitative elements and all these drawings, and he's trying to then, essentially, that then just becomes a number, which is the best through to which is the worst. Which order are you putting them in, from best to worst? And that's how that's done, essentially, and that's how the pilot was done. And we compared 2 things. I mean, 12 trials is not enough to get statistical significance. It really wasn't. I think we did a calculation after the pilot study to say we need to be doing round about 70 to 80 trials, not 12, to start actually getting statistically meaningful data out of this. So we'll relook at that when we start this next phase. But the other element was, let's look at all those instances in which things seem to be a hit, where I was correct in my own judging and Dr. Glenn Hitchman was correct in his judging, and what did the video clip look like? And some of them were really striking, and it's a shame I can't show you on the show right now, but for the people listening, one particular instance which I found really quite remarkable was I'd drawn a picture of a car, and I'd shown in the picture wheels in motion, and I said there's a number of cars, and I'm getting a sense of this one car with movement, and there's cogwheels, and it's something to do with a bridge, and there's some water. And the clip that turned out to be the target for that particular trial was a section from the film The Blues Brothers, when they've stolen the police car. and they're talking through the qualities of the police car and what they like about it. And Dan Aykroyd says, "Should we do it?" or something like that. And he hits the gas and they drive over the suspension bridge as it's going up. And the main thing you're seeing in that clip is the cogwheels that are turning the suspension bridge to go up over the water. The car drives over and onto the other side. So that was a really nice one. When we've shown that to audiences, you get a nice gasp from the audience as they see the drawings in comparison to the clip. So yeah, that's essentially what we're doing. We're going to do it on a much bigger scale, and there's going to be, several studies that are going to come out of this, because we've got this PhD student coming in, and we've got 3 years worth of data to collect.
Sounds fantastic.
Stunned you all into silence. Stunned silence.
I am shocked that you got a correlation.
Well, only just on that single clip, which might just be purely coincidental. Someone might say, well, Cal, to be honest, those sound interesting, but they're really not strong enough. You'd need more elements to make it even more convincing. But just for the basis of a judge looking at 4 clips and which one best fits, that one certainly did, compared to, say, if it was a documentary of some tortoise in a field, or a Tom and Jerry clip, and, I don't know, a hot air balloon or something like that. They're clearly very distinct, and that's why you would have gone for that one. So that's why we don't judge them on the individual element. On the individual element, they can be quite interesting to just show as an example. But overall, we're looking at how good are people over a number of trials when we're testing a number of different people. And that's not what we did in the pilot. It was just me over and over again, just to see, is this even practical? Does this actually work? And so we've taken that forward now. Those few, maybe 3 or 4 hits that we looked at were really quite striking in their qualitative elements. So we are taking it forward because it just showed that promise, and we looked at possibilities for opening this up more. So yeah, that's where we are.
So when you're in the tank, are you focusing or directing your thought to the person that's watching the video, or are you just drifting?
Yeah, that's a good question. So technically, David wasn't really necessary, but we thought whatever we set up in the first place, let's just absolutely roll with it all the way through. We did. I mean, essentially, this could be seen as a remote viewing project, where I could have just focused on that particular room that I knew was in the psychology department, and on trying to, in my mind, go to a computer screen knowing that something would be playing, because in real time, something was. And so having David there are some remote viewing studies where you send a close friend to that randomly assigned location, and you're told your friend has gone to this location. Can you think about them and where they are? They've been told to go and interact with the environment. So it gives you a focal point, something or someone to actually focus on. But for a lot of remote viewing studies, there's no person there. You are literally trying to focus on a particular environment somewhere in the world. So in my head, the way that this played out was, I would think about the psychology department and walking in through this particular door, and then seeing David in that room, and I would walk up and look over his shoulder as though I'm trying to get from his perspective what he's actually looking at. Whether that helped or not, I don't know. I don't think for these next trials we're going to use someone in that same capacity as we did David. But that's what I was doing. That's how we set it up, and that's how we rolled for those 12 trials.
But that's the expansion of the experiment, isn't it? Going, okay, I might not need that person sitting there watching that, because if you take out that other human factor, then it is purely you, rather than maybe a telepathic link between the two of you. It takes that factor out. Am I right in thinking that? And
that was, there's that critical thinking element. So even as we were doing the study, we were thinking about improvements, saying actually that we shouldn't have gone ahead with this, but let's stick with it, because that's what we said we'll do, but we'll make a note of all these changes. So, there's that investigation, there's that report writing. So in the discussion section of the report, we mention all these things that we thought during the study, we thought about this. So therefore, in a follow-up study, we need to do this and we need to do that. We looked at all these potential corrections and refinements that we could make. And that's what a report is for, be it a haunting investigation report or this. You've looked at areas of concern that you didn't have time to focus on in that initial thing. And you're saying to either yourself as a reminder, when you follow up this study, you need to correct this, or to anyone reading that report, if you copy this recipe, if you like the idea of this cake, you need to follow these instructions and use these ingredients to these measures, and you should get a good outcome. If you're not following them right, something might go wrong and you might not get the outcome you expect. So you're getting this kind of chain, this sequence of events, and if you follow them, this is the outcome. However, we considered these. Try some alternatives. Does it change in any way? If it was a recipe, would it change the flavour? Would it make it better? Would it make it worse?
Exactly. That's exactly the process of scientific research, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
So
That's science in a nutshell.
basically, that's how you do it, guys. Now you've written, I've quoted 3 books that you've got your name on: Telephone Calls from the Dead, Conversations with Ghosts, and Paracoustics. What's your favourite out of the 3?
As much as for a while I was getting quite tired of talking about it, Telephone Calls from the Dead, because it served me well, in terms of it's given me a lot to talk about. A lot of people have approached me for the topic, but it was a small printing production. It was with Tricorn Books, who are based in Portsmouth. And only 1,000 copies came out of the original. They all went instantly. They've gone, a lot of them, over to America. Orders just came in thick and fast. And I haven't had it updated at all. And so I really need to, by this Christmas, do an ebook of the original. And I'm thinking of, by December of this year as well, also having a 10th anniversary edition that will be a limited run just of the original format. I'll probably do a preface just to talk about 10 years on and thoughts on this 10 years on. But then after that, I've had a few publishers that have approached me for the topic, in which I think I should just take kind of some of the core aspects of the book, but just do a completely revised book, probably under a different title, but it's still about telephone anomalies. So yeah, I've always found it interesting. I keep kind of coming back and forth. I keep returning to it. People ask me questions on it, and then it goes away for a while. But it keeps coming back to me. So yeah, I enjoy that. And because it's not been available, Paracoustics has been very helpful as well, because there's a whole chapter on there in telephone anomalies anyway, which has helped with the fact that Telephone Calls from the Dead just hasn't been available. You can still get it through your libraries, though, because it's in the British Library. So if you're desperate to read a copy, just go to your local library and interlibrary loan it, and you'll get a copy of it. And Conversations with Ghosts, I mean, that's also quite close to my heart, because I'm so close to the Alex Tannis Foundation and the Alex Tannis family. They've been very kind to me and very supportive, and helped me a lot with the archival research on Alex Tannis. So there's a lot more to do there in terms of recovering his material. I mean, I didn't write it, but I rewrote the entire book out, did a lot of necessary edits here and there to create clarity, wrote the introduction and with Professor Stanley Krippner, and then had Professor Adrian Parker write the afterwards. So that's for the book Science Psychotherapy. So my name's not on the cover. It's Alex Tannis, Elaine Swinge, and Andrew Bambrick, all psychologists, psychiatrists, and psychotherapists, looking at using, as far as Alex Tannis saw it, this sort of a psychic element to the psychotherapy setting. So I rewrote that entire book out from an original manuscript and tied it up. So that was another progression in archiving and bringing a lot of Alex Tannis's unpublished material out into the public light. So yeah.
Just for clarification to our listeners, who was Alex Tannis?
Alex Tannis was he was a state registered psychologist for the state of Massachusetts. He was a professed psychic and someone who claimed he could go out of his body at will. He also claimed the ability to predict the future. One of his massive claims was saying that he predicted the death of John Lennon 2 weeks before it happened, and he'd announced it on radio. Ironically as well, the American Society for Psychical Research is literally opposite the Dakota building. You look out the window of the ASPR and the Dakota building's on the opposite side of the street, exactly where, on the ground floor into the entrance, where John Lennon was shot. So Alex had spent a lot of time staring out that window. So it's interesting that he's saying that 2 weeks beforehand, when he was doing a lot of research there, that he just had a feeling that this was going to happen. And lo and behold, John Lennon gets shot. And Alex is making this kind of announcement on radio 2 weeks beforehand. But he was also tested at the Maimonides Medical Center and the ASPR for the ability to project light from his eyes, where he project images onto walls and things like that. So some reports existing here and there, a lot in the the archives of the ASPR and the Alex Tannis archives, not a lot has gone into the journals, which then starts to make you question things about this. But fascinating guy that certainly has got very little criticism to his name, and yet was very much out there making these claims. So it's quite interesting with someone in his position to not get challenged more often. But he was also highly educated. He had an undergraduate degree in government and politics, a master's in theology, a master's in philosophy, a master's in psychology and counselling, and a divinity doctorate as well. So a doctorate that focuses on biblical text and interpretation, like a theology PhD, essentially.
Fascinating man, well worth looking into if you don't know who that is or his achievements.
Yeah, he's still got an autobiography kicking around, and what I really want to do is a full-on biography of him. But his autobiography is called Beyond Coincidence, so you'll still be able to find that on eBay, ABE Books, and places like that.
Oh, it's one of my favourite places, ABE Books. ABE Books, yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I've got
That's
a few books from there.
right little cracker of a site that is, definitely for books.
Yeah.
Right. So there is so much we could talk to you about, but I want to take you back to the last 18 months with what's happened in the world. From a psychological perspective on that, there's been so much diversive, is that the right word? Stuff.
Yeah, that go.
Divisive
stuff that's out there for the normal person. What long-term impact do you think that situation has caused for people? Do you think it's as traumatic as certain other people have been saying, or do you think it's just something that we'll just get over and get on with?
It depends which element you mean, really. I mean, if it comes to COVID-19, then that's something that now, like cold and flus, we've got to live with and just be aware that it's in the system. It's created quite a shift in social norms now, where in a lot of places, and I'm certainly still doing it because the institutions that I work in, it's now common courtesy to continue wearing masks in public spaces until you get to, a point where you're doing a talk. So you've got to take it off so people can see your lips move, or you sat down to have a coffee, so of course you can take your mask off because you need to eat, you need to drink. And we couldn't imagine something like that, least of all in the UK 2 or 3 years ago. And yet other cultures, if you turn to places like Japan, it's common courtesy after having had a cold to walk around with a mask on. For other people's sake, to know that you've recently been poorly and you're doing it to shield others away from you and your germs. But then you've got another side of it. If it's not that kind of daily awareness and living with COVID-19 and washing our hands and sanitizing, just being aware of services and interactions with other people that we don't know, it's lockdown and what that did for people and the psychology of isolation. So much so, I've got a PhD student just coming in, interested in looking at sense of presence phenomena and apparitions and the amount and state of loss during COVID-19. I won't go into that too much because he should really come on at some point, maybe after a year or so, when he's collected some data or really started to dig into the research and tell you more about this. But what happened there? People like Chris Wrench even wrote an article asking, has there been a rise in reports of apparitions and poltergeist phenomena during lockdown because people are spending more time in their homes? It's like a sort of a third or fourth rise of spiritualism, where we had periods where in the darker points of the year people would spend more time in homes because there was nowhere else to go, so you were sheltered by your four walls, various changes in lighting effects during the day and night. You're becoming more familiar with the building that you're in, and there's all these cracks and creaks of the buildings and shadows moving from the flickers of the candle and the flames of the fire. Is there a lot of misinterpretation going on? But then again, what about your state of loss? Especially when it came to World War I, that was certainly a second rise in spiritualism. A mass amount of loss that was unaccounted for the families. They didn't get that chance to say goodbye. People were becoming more aware of spiritualists and mediums coming forward and communication allegedly from the dead. So were they having a lot of experiences in their homes they were interpreting as that person returning? And then this just spread like wildfire. And that was happening during this lockdown. People weren't able to go to the hospital with their loved one, and suddenly they think, they just got poorly with this cold, turns out to be COVID, boom, a week later they were dead, and yet they were perfectly healthy. You weren't there at their bedside. You weren't able to go to the nursing homes necessarily. I know there were some exceptions to the rule. People got special permissions in some cases, but for a lot of people, that opportunity just was not there. They were told under no circumstances, go here, go there. And so there are a lot of people that just did not get a final goodbye. And so it does make you think, well, what was their experience like after that? Were they back at home surrounded by that loved one's items, their smells from perfumes, tobaccos, aftershaves, and whatever, photographs that was creating, this sense that person was there? Were they not having experiences and it was literally just their items, and then, progressed that state of grief because that they got unanswered questions? They didn't know what that person was like during the end. How were they feeling? Did they pass in pain? Were they thinking of me? Were they talking about me? All these things. So I think to answer your question, there's a big lasting impact of COVID-19 that's now permanently set in our history. A lot of instant paperbacks came out in various bookstores and stuff from nurses and physicians' perspective and other professionals, just playing on that instant interest in COVID-19 and people wanting to know more. But the amount of research as well, the journals were filling up with it. We were doing research on bereavement-based experiences, and we struggled to get a word in edgeways because there was so much being done directly on the consequences of COVID-19.
Mm-hmm.
So it's here to stay, and it's had some overlaps. And I think when it comes to anomalous experiences, it hasn't been explored at all, except for some general ponderings by people like Chris French and others. And I think it is something to explore. The psychology of isolation, just like the tanks, is a very real thing. And we've had it in our history books from the World Wars and before. This has been unprecedented, what we've just had. And we don't know much about people's experiences because no one's really gone out and questioned them in great depth.
Lots of information and material to come, I feel.
Yes, absolutely. I'll send Aaron over once he's got stuck in. He can come and talk to you.
Oh yeah, that would be fantastic.
Yeah.
We've actually got to let you go right now, but thank you so much for coming on tonight. Can I have you back on again at some point?
Absolutely, and we'll go for the full 2. So absolutely.
Awesome. Thank
Fantastic.
you so much, Carol, for joining us. It's been an absolute pleasure as always.
Pleasure. Thanks for having me, Kerry. Richard, Paul, it's been lovely speaking to you.
Okay,
Thank you so
thank
much.
you, Cal.
you.
And now the lovely Cal Cooper, Dr. Cal Cooper, has left the building. We're going to carry on for the last half an hour to tell you all about what happened on Saturday night. We were out, and I don't even want to use the word investigating now. We were ghost hunting. I don't dare I use that word. We were ghost hunting on Saturday night.
Because we're ghost enthusiasts.
We are, yeah. But I have to say, I always take a lot away from talking to people like Cal Cooper, because it kind of redefines yourself, doesn't it? When we talk about, I mean, we go out, we are ghost enthusiasts. We go out ghost hunting, we hire a building, and we don't really do much than the generic blueprint of a TV show, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Well, yeah, I totally agree with it, and it's good to hear it said from somebody like Dr. Cal Cooper. I certainly don't take any offence from that whatsoever.
No, because we're aware that is exactly what we're doing. We're not actually collecting data per se. I'm not writing reports up afterwards. I mean, gosh, remembering to write reports on the evening is a trial in itself some nights. But we was out ghost hunting at Sandwich Guildhall on Saturday evening, and we were joined by the lovely Andy Mercer, who's joined us in the studio. Hi, Andy.
Hello. It sounds like I've missed an interesting conversation, which I'll no doubt catch up with at a later point.
Oh, yeah, Dr. Cal Cooper is fantastic, absolutely fantastic.
I just wanted to add, just one thing I wanted to add, just on the back of what you were just saying there. Back in the old days in my old group, IOPR, we did try to do proper, quote, investigations. And it would take more time to set up with the various pieces of equipment that we all had with us than we had time to actually investigate. It got phenomenally boring. It really did. I used to write up proper reports on what we'd experienced. And it just took the complete fun out of it. It was just boring, sitting there for hours looking at screens and equipment, registering temperature changes, EMF readings, all that kind of thing, noting them as you went along, and realising after 5 hours nothing's happened, absolutely nothing. So I'd rather be just an amateur enthusiast. It's more fun.
It is more fun, that side of it, but Cal does recognise that. He does say it won't hit the TVs. It's boring. It's going in. It's collecting witness statements. It's generally during the day when phenomena is supposed to have happened, not at night time. It's not really using any tech. It's sitting in a room and just observing the location and building up a case file there, more than, like you say, the generic TV blueprint that we all know and love and do, because that's pretty much what we do, isn't it? Try different experiments, psychic experiments. We use all the tech. We use our spirit boxes and our EMF meters and our temperature gauges, and but we actually get more when you think about it from when we're just sitting around talking about how we're feeling and watching how people are reacting to the environment that is surrounding them. So there are lessons to be learned from both sides of it, I feel. And
Absolutely. I think that's pretty much like when you go in for general paranormal investigation, when you try and go in blind, as it were. But when you're doing a scientific experiment, you can't really go in blind. You have to, obviously, before going in, get that 2-week diary that Cal mentioned. And not only that, you might see patterns, and then you can get witness statements from everybody, and so you know what's going on, what's alleged to be going on before you go in, and then you can devise your experiments to see what activity is happening. So you can, it's a methodology. You have to have method in your experiments.
Yeah, because it's unlike sort of like the ghost hunting. Like from a ghost hunting standpoint, everyone will say, I don't want to know nothing about the location and before we go in. But from a scientific point of view, you need to collect any relevant data before you go into a building. I find that sort of quite interesting.
Yes, it's more than I think we probably reached the conclusions we're never going to prove anything to anybody other than ourselves, really. In trying to get that kind of evidence, if professional scientific researchers and academics such as Cal have maybe attempted to find that kind of information and they haven't succeeded, what chance have we got, really? I mean, I think it's for our own interest. It's the old saying, is that you're not going to prove it to anyone who doesn't believe, and those who believe don't need the proof. So it's always going to be that kind of dilemma. I think we are only looking for our own satisfaction. I mean, the trouble is you can produce fantastic evidence, but if there's no one else who can verify it, I mean, I mentioned occasionally I've got a piece of video footage which I think is absolutely wonderful, but you need to say, oh, it was just faked, and I can't prove it wasn't. There's no way I can prove it wasn't. I know it wasn't, and those who were involved know it wasn't, but it's as far as it goes. Beyond that, you can't prove any of it. So yeah, but I think we have good fun. I think Saturday night was particularly interesting, quite enjoyable.
Fantastic location, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Paul, you set that up. You found a location, and you got to talk to the guy, the caretaker, before the rest of us had really arrived. What was he sort of saying about the place?
He was saying that at that particular point in time, they were having a lot of restoration work going on, and it seemed to have sparked off more activity than what they had previously. And they do get staff reports that there's footsteps following them down the corridors, and they hear noises of furniture moving and things like that. Obviously, that's sort of the stuff we didn't really tell you, and I know that Andy experienced a little bit of that himself.
Andy?
Yeah, definitely. There was one point walking back from where the kitchen was to where we were using as our base camp, which is in the much more modern part of the building. Definitely heard what sounded like 4 or 5 footsteps somewhere behind me. It was in the corridor I was in, and the obvious explanation would be just the floor creaking behind you. But as I remember, that part of the floor was modern. It wasn't old. And
no, it's concrete.
There was nothing to make it creak the way it did. 1 or 2 you might dismiss, but it was, I would say, a good 4 or 5 like dump, 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 dump footsteps as they were behind me somewhere back. I looked back and there was nobody there. And when I came into the main room, everyone who was there in the building that night, apart from the caretaker, was in the room with us. And I'm fairly certain the caretaker was still downstairs. I don't think he'd come upstairs. He'd have to have come up literally past me and back down again for him to have been where I heard the footsteps. So I doubt it was him. But, again, can't prove any of it. Just that's what I heard.
Yeah, it's just
Yeah.
one of those experiences you had on the night, which makes it a little bit more interesting, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely.
Now, the one downside I will say to that particular location is right smack bang in the middle of town, and there was a really bad karaoke night going on, which kind of took things like EVP out of the equation and stuff like
Well,
that, wasn't
yeah,
it?
to
Because
be
it would have been
fair,
contamination.
it wasn't a bad karaoke session. The karaoke in itself was fine. It was some of the sandwich locals. I mean, granted, there were some good ones, but yeah,
But
Yeah.
it did lead to a lot of noise contamination, didn't it?
yeah, it did. Yeah,
I think we can safely say that one or two of them are sandwich short of a picnic.
It's just, I think that's just a drunken Saturday night in any town, to be fair.
Yeah.
You know, let's be fair.
but
Um,
it's just one of those things you can't help. But it's sort of like you know, the bad side of the paranormal that we have to put up with.
Mm. It's a shame that a great location can suffer that kind of a problem. I must admit, it does occasionally happen when we have places in town. I remember the second time we did the Edinburgh Vaults, my old group, the pub next door had become a nightclub and was open till 1 a.m. and it was quite loud. And it was very disappointing considering how good it had been the first time we were there. But
Great entertainment for the spirits, though, when we're not there.
yeah, lots of spirits for them.
it did make me wonder what they might have made of all of that, whether or not that's a deterrent for them. But then the experiences that the caretaker was having was just like normal every day
Yeah.
as they're working and living and doing what they do in the building. So, you know, it's a fascinating location. So if anybody can gets a chance to investigate it, then I would suggest you do, because it dates right back to the 1500s, right through to modern buildings. So, you know, it's got layers, hasn't it? It's got a lot of layers in there.
Very much so.
Absolutely.
It is a really interesting vibe in various spots. Now, we kind of stuck to the older bits, didn't we?
We did. We liked the older bits.
Yeah, was it the mayor's parlour or whatever it was, and down in the courtroom?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we had them. Yeah, we stuck to that. I did want to sort of. There was like a modern, like, what would you call it?
Hall, wasn't it? A dance hall or something?
Yeah.
It had a
Dance
stage.
hall, yeah,
Had a
with a
stage.
Yeah, like where you'd have your wedding reception or, you know, that
Yeah.
kind of place. And we carried out a little experiment in there. Now, I would say that the people we were with are generally more skeptical.
Yeah.
Yes, that would be a fair comment.
Apart from us girls.
Yeah, apart from the girls.
Apart from the girlies. So at one point we were doing the experiment and we weren't really getting anything. So we decided to take the girl factor out of it. And we went into a separate room completely, quite, you know, it's next door, but it's not next door, if that makes sense. It's sort of down the corridor.
So as soon as all the girls went, we did it properly.
But you didn't get anything.
No, we didn't get anything on that. No.
No, we didn't get anything, but I will say it was a bit strange when Richard broke the circle because his arms were hurting. And then I think it was Daryl that was sitting next to Richard and his arm started hurting.
Mm-hmm.
And then someone else's arm started hurting.
Mm-hmm.
All in succession.
What's interesting about that is me, Lucy, and Tara were in another room away from the lads. And we were trying to project onto the group, onto the boys, basically, and say, affect them somehow, do something in that room. And Lucy said, someone's got a pain in their arm.
Yeah.
There's pains in their arm. And then when we went back into the room, when we all joined back up together again, it turns out that 3 of the group ended up with pains in their arm. Now, they're sitting in a circle. They're sitting in a circle on chairs, not miles apart. They're not stretched out, loosely holding hands, because boys don't really like to hold hands, right? It's not a comfortable, it's like physical contact, oh my God. And so I wouldn't say there was strain on the arms.
No, you're right.
So it's not like you were arms out or your arm muscles are starting to ache. You're just loosely holding hands in a comfortable position, and 3 of the circle had pains in your arms, didn't you?
Oh, yeah.
I wouldn't say that's conclusive though, because what we thought and what was occurring was different sides of the body.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I just think there's an interesting and a loosely interesting correlation there, that you three of you had pains in your arms, and Lucy had said that while we was in the other room,
Yeah.
and kind of called it. Whether that means anything, I don't know. Whether that was just coincidence, I don't know. It's just one of those interesting little things that happened on the night, right?
Yeah.
Absolutely. Definitely one of those things.
The other thing I found very interesting was when we was in the courthouse, which is the oldest part of the building.
Yeah.
Fantastic place, I have to say. The courthouse itself. Whilst we were in there, we didn't catch anything. Putting that out there, EVP was off the table. Weren't getting anything through on the spirit box. Nothing major was going on. But at one point, every single member reacted to something in that room. Whether it was a feeling, turning their heads, thinking someone was stood at the back or up on the top by the mayor's chair.
Yep.
And it all happened around the same time. And it wasn't like, oh, did you hear that? And everybody was sort of like dominoing it. You could see the reaction between people as they thought something had happened, something was there. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, I was getting the feeling someone was behind me,
Mm-hmm.
and it wasn't until a bit later someone said about the flowers moving. Although they
Yes.
have, we've looked on the footage and there isn't any
Yeah,
No.
that was
movement.
Lucy and I were both at the same time thought we saw something.
Yeah, and towards the back of the room as well,
Mm.
looking as well. So could there been something there?
Who knows? At the same time, Lucy and Andy thought that. I'd said I thought there was somebody up there.
Yeah, and on the stairs as well, wasn't there?
And
There
then
was movement
obviously
on the stairs
there was
apparently.
movement on the stairs as well, which is when your brother went off to have a look, didn't he? He went off
Yeah.
to see if where the caretaker was, because it could have been the care. Like you don't know. You have to check these things out,
That's
right?
right.
But it was all around the same sort of time
It was.
that was sort of happening. Now, was that just again, you could put it down to something of nothing. What do we
I
think
if it
of
was
that?
if it was just one thing, then yeah, I'd say, you could put it down to coincidence. But 3 incidences at the same time,
Makes you
I
wonder.
know, that's pushing it a bit, isn't it?
Yeah.
Andy, what would your take be on that?
Well, exactly that. I mean, a couple of obviously elements we have to consider is there was some light bleed from outside that
Mhm.
could be that could result in sort of just the light making it appear something move. But the fact that Lucy and I both at the same moment thought we saw movement, and as I say, I thought the camera might have caught something. As it was, there was nothing. I could see in the footage there wasn't like a light passed by in front of the flowers or anything like that that would have given the impression the light level changing because of the lights outside. There was nothing to give the impression there was movement. It just was there. So why we both thought we saw something is interesting. So clearly it was at the same time. So I don't know. Maybe there was something that was moving that the camera didn't pick up, of course, but we both caught something. That's the interesting thing.
Yeah,
Richard.
the courtroom was an interesting place. I certainly didn't feel as anything sort of. I didn't sort of feel anything like a presence or anything, but it was just a sort of place I found an interesting, and and a couple of times I did look behind me. I mean, I don't know what prompted me to do that, but it just was, so whether I was sort of picking up on something, I don't know, but it was interesting all the same.
Now, when we was upstairs in the mayor's room, Tara, yourself, and Mitchell, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Was on the
Mitchell or
Ouija board.
Conrad, one of the two.
Yeah, was on the Ouija board, the very first session we did.
Yeah.
On that. And what did you make of that? Because you're usually quite skeptical of the Ouija, aren't you?
I do like the Ouija board actually, but up until but up until date, it hasn't really sort of like performed the way I would like it to perform, where, you know, spelling out sort of words and being coherent. But that session we done, I actually got a lot out of that because, you know, the words, and it was actually spelling out words, you know, which is the first time I've ever really sort of witnessed or been a party to something like that, as strong as that. And the, you know, the the board seemed to be flowing really well, you know, and I did sort of, you know, because we got the name Richard, what was his name?
Harper.
Richard
Harper.
Harper, you know, sort of with a, you know, with some dates, a connection to perhaps the English Civil Wars, which I found all quite fascinating because, again, it's something I do know a little bit about. I mean, but is that just me sort of moving the planchette, you know, because I know this sort of thing? I don't know. I mean, I certainly wasn't physically, well, from what I could tell, physically moving that planchette, nor was anyone else that was on the board. But it was a very free flowing Ouija board session I found, and I didn't sort of get it sort of tired through it either.
Andy, what was your opinion bit, or not opinion? What was, you know, because we talk about the ideomotor effect, don't we?
Yeah.
Talk us through that concept of what that is.
Well, unconscious movement, really. The idea that, well, and there's other ways that you can look at it, but certainly the idea that you physically move anyway. You can't help it but move. Your body is moving, and you can transfer that movement onto it quite easy without even realizing you're doing it. Also, the power of suggestion. You're trying to get the idea of communication through the Ouija board, with your fingers touching gently against a piece of wood that itself is quite light. It doesn't take much to move it, and you could even have an unconscious desire for it to move, not deliberately want to make it move, but then it still moves because you have the desire for it to move. So, I mean, all those elements come into it. I'm not a big fan of them myself. I do think much of what you get is coming from, if anywhere, your own subconscious. And, you know, the people that use them and get worried by them often have nasty experiences because they're expecting to have them. They kind of believe that's what's going to be happening for them with those things. So, and, you know, it's so easy to fake as well. You know, for one person can deliberately fake it. You'd be
Yeah.
surprised how easy it is to move it. And when the people around want it to be real, unwillingly go ahead with it, go with it without even realizing they're doing it. So there are all those features and factors that come into it. But I do think, as I say, even the idea of you involuntarily, because you can't help but not move sometimes, and it takes a little to move that damn thing, that you're going to get a response.
But what did you make of it as a witness? Because you was videoing that particular session, weren't you? Because that tends to be what you do. You stand back, video, and observe what's playing out in front of you. Now, none of us are going to take any offence to anything you might say here, and we might just slap you when we see you. But, you know, don't worry about that. Don't worry about that. What was your observation on that night?
But what I will say is that there have been times in the past where I have videoed other people using Ouija boards with real honesty and belief that it's doing something genuine. And when I watch the footage back, you can see who's actually pushing it because of the way in which the thing moves. You can't help it.
Yeah.
So that's one thing I'm always aware of, that, you know, to look closely to see if anyone is pushing anything. To be honest with you, the video footage from Saturday evening, the angle I was at, I couldn't tell. To be perfectly honest with you, it was difficult to say from where I was sitting whether it was being moved or not deliberately, as I say, whether it was being faked, if you like. I don't know. I couldn't say definitively yes or no to that. It looked good, but it's not necessarily because it looks good doesn't mean to say it's going to be real or genuine. So I have to say, at best, I don't know. I wouldn't like to say definitively either way. I was at the wrong kind of angle. I usually have with me a taller tripod, which actually can lean over and be filming almost from above. That gives you a much clearer idea of what's going on. You can see very subtle nuanced movements that someone's doing, even if they don't realize they're doing it deliberately. You can kind of see how there's a transference of momentum from the hand and fingers into it. And that is often a bit of a giveaway. But that one I really couldn't see because I was at quite a low angle, a little bit way off from it.
So, subjective again, you have to be there to appreciate it, I suppose. But some amazing information did come out on that Ouija that we've tried to look into. Haven't succeeded particularly well right now, but that doesn't mean we're going to stop looking into that behind the scenes. It's just another area of ongoing dabble of research, isn't it, really?
Yeah. Definitely.
Oh yeah.
And that's I think the best we can do, isn't it? Is like, go out on our little ghost hunt, do what we need to do, and if any information does come out, try and follow the thread.
Yes,
That's
that's
it.
the
Try and
best.
follow it through, yeah. That's all you can. You're going to be bombarded with lots of different sorts of stuff. Some of a more earthly realm than others, So it's just a case of just trying your best to sort of just use your own discernment and and take away from it what you will.
It would be good to try and record as much information as we could, and then see what the SPR make of it.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think they'd be interested. It's a ghost hunt at the end of the day.
I find them a particularly interesting group, to be perfectly honest with you. I don't want to sort of go down the wrong road here, but there is definitely an element of them trying to be scientific and prove things scientifically, but almost like, are you barking up the wrong tree? Is it the sort of things ever going to be? Is there any? I think we talked about this before, but is there any criteria that can be produced that these things can meet in order to be proven to be real? I don't think so. I think there's always going to be that's going to be the problem forever. You can't definitively prove it. You can't definitively disprove it either.
I'm of that opinion as well, Andy. I don't think this field would ever be proven. Sort of.
I don't think it's not about proving it, though. It's about building a body of experiences and seeing if there are collations that you can then transfer over into a scientific study. I think the problem with anomalous phenomena is it doesn't happen on cue.
Yes. This is the one, I mean, I think we've talked about this before. This is one of the biggest problems, to meet the scientific criteria as required. It has to be demonstrable in a laboratory, repeatedly demonstrable, and it's not going to be. And I say, I'm sure you talked about this previously, but there are things, a good example of that is love. You can't prove love in a laboratory. Therefore, according to conventional science, love doesn't exist, which is complete nonsense. So we are always kind of caught in that loop of trying to meet a certain criteria that by its nature, it cannot be met. All you can demonstrate or prove is there are odd phenomena that doesn't fit the conventional scientific understanding of everything. We can't prove that. I mean, again, my personal thinking, I tend to see these things as more ultra terrestrials, kind of other realities, that kind of thing, rather than the conventional ghost. If you can prove a ghost exists, first of all, you've got to be clear and define what you mean by a ghost. What is it we're actually trying to prove exists? Are we trying to prove a life after death, that these are spirits from other realms that have come back with messages for us? I don't believe that for a moment. I've never believed that kind of what I would call the Victorian sense of these things. So what else is it? What else are we looking for? If you can't be clear, everyone be clear in the criteria of what it is we're looking for, i.e. what we think it is, then you're never going to prove it, because if you can't come to agree with what it is you're looking for, you can't prove any of it.
No, but we can take forward critical thinking. We can take an awareness of our own belief systems and look at logical things before we jump to the hashtag it's a ghost into the field. You know what I mean? What we can do is take down people's experiences. We can try and build up a catalogue of things where we can take it to the next step. Is it telepathy? Is it I don't know, other factors at work? Or you know what I mean? I think that there is a crossover point between the two fields that we can bring together that makes it useful for people bigger and brighter and cleverer than us that may be able to provide answers for certain areas of this.
But again,
That's it. I mean, if we was to document it correctly, get all the eyewitnesses' accounts and everything, and we'll show how much research we've actually put into it and how far we've gone, and we can't go no more. If you was then to say, for example, Cal Cooper, if you want to have a look at this, look at it, this is everything we found out, maybe you could build on that. But as I said, it's got to be sort of their standard.
Yeah.
That's where I think you fall down. I don't think you can meet the standards. It's the kind of phenomena that's never going to meet those required standards.
But then Cal Cooper could then go back to us and say, well, actually, you done this bit wrong. Go back. Maybe you can have a word with that eyewitness again.
Yeah.
And we could then get it up to the scratch by using his expertise.
Yeah, I mean, it's a possible. I mean, we're obviously speaking in abstract rather than anything definitive. But it's one of those things. Again, you have the whole problem of witnesses, and witnesses. I mean, what I do for a living. Witnesses' memory and the fallibility of memory, what you think you remember happening, what actually occurred, can be very far apart. When you genuinely believe what you describe as having happened, but then other descriptions of events emerge, or you have on occasion things like videos that are recorded of an event and show it, and it's well away from what you thought you experienced or saw. So that can be part of the problem. It's a difficult one, because as much as I'd love it, and I came into this field a number of years ago in the hopes of being able to produce that definitive piece of evidence that say, look at this, you can't deny this. But the more we thought about it, the more I thought, well, how can you do that? What can you produce that's out there in the world that is undeniable? I don't think there is anything really. I mean, you can theorize about stuff and be able to then prove something later on as being real. It's got to be definitive in itself. I mean, a good example would be things like black holes. They were theorized as existing by Einstein long before any evidence for their existence was ever found. But he theorized in a way that the criteria could be met. And behold, all these years later, they were discovered real examples of black holes as an example. That's that kind of build a structure of an idea of what you are looking for, and hope you can find something that meets that criteria, or look for something that meets that criteria. And if you've got the criteria right, you find it. But how do you define a criteria of research for this field? What is it you're trying to prove specifically? I mean, as an example, if you're going out there with the firm belief that you want to demonstrate there is life after death, that old phrase, well, what the hell does that mean? In itself, what does that mean? Are you talking about reincarnation? You're trying to prove that? Then that's a different kind of field entirely to trying to prove the existence of so-called ghosts. It's having a definitive idea of what is a shared concept of what a ghost is. You need to define that clearly in a way that we're all in agreement, and then look for it.
Yeah.
It can work the other way around, in which you try to amass evidence of what you're discovering. But all that does is prove there is anomalous phenomena. Now, I don't think it would be hard to deny that there is anomalous phenomena, i.e. things that don't fit conventional understandings that do occur. But that's a very broad topic, a very broad area. It's hard to deny that. That's I honestly genuinely mean this, and sort of nearly 30 years doing this nonsense. I've always said the only thing I've proven to myself is there is anomalous phenomena, weird things happen. But that's it. None of them can be nothing. There's no theory that fits all the evidence, if you like, all the things I've experienced over the years. There's no one unifiable theory, except this idea that there are levels of existence, reality around us. There are things that live within it that do occasionally interact with us in the real world, in the physical world. That's as far as I go. Whether they are aliens from outer space, or beings from other realities, or paranormal dimensions, or the dead returning, I don't know. But there is something that happens. Certainly.
Well, on that note, we have actually come to the end of the show for the week. But thoroughly interesting investigation on Ghost Hunt. I hate to say that now after Cal. On Saturday evening. So, what a great show overall, in one way or another, wasn't it, guys?
Yeah, absolutely.
show,
And I think maybe the term paranormal enthusiast investigation might work.
It is down to terminology, and sometimes the terminology is what it's all about, really. On that note, thanks, Andy, for joining us for the last half of the show, or the last bit of the show.
Yeah, great fun. Enjoyed it, as always.
Boys, anything to report?
You could buy our books on paranormalconcept.com. Have a listen to all our back shows as well on the same email website address. And I think that's about it for me.
Yeah, it's just about covered it all there.
On that note, it's just time to say goodbye then. Goodbye, guys.
Goodbye, guys.
Bye.
Bye.